That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives.
It is a wonderful and astonishing thing to me that you and I, are somehow at least one of the ways that the universe knows itself.
Those worlds in space are as countless as all the grains of sand on all the beaches of the earth. Each of those worlds is as real as ours. In every one of them, there's a succession of incidents, events, occurrences, which influence its future.
We are special because we're the same. We are one, not only with each other, but with the universe itself.
I know Hamlet, and what he might say with irony, I say with conviction. What a piece of work is man. How noble it is, how infinite in faculty, in form, in moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god.
It is the struggle itself that is most important. We must strive to be more than we are, love. It does not matter that we will never reach our ultimate goal. The effort yields its own rewards.
Ten, 9, 8.
Let's
7,
rock and roll!
6.
Hello, greetings at magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. This is your Kaspacer and Space Commander Sir Jun Cajigal from San Beda University, Manila, founder of the Bedan Society of Young Astronomers and founder of the Sky Watchers Society of Las Piñas. And I'm very honored to be invited here to give you an inspirational talk about the beauty of stargazing. But let me tell you this, I am not a professional astronomer. In fact, I am a biologist. I am a biology educator. I finished my BS Zoology as my undergrad course. I finished my Masters of Science in Teaching Biology and pursuing my doctorate degree in biology. So the question is, what am I doing here giving you an astronomy talk? Well, I just fell in love with astronomy. I fell in love with the night sky. And you know what? Every time I look at the stars in the sky long enough, the feeling of magic runs through me. The longer you stare at the night sky, the more they appear, captivating you every minute, every second. And I remember the first time I saw the night sky encrusted with stars in depth. I was only 8 years old then, and I usually wake up at 2 a.m. to climb to the roof of our house. Aakit lang ako ng bubong ng bahay namin with my bed sheet and pillow with me. And I would just lay on the roof looking at the clear sky. And pagbaba ko ng bubong, nakahanda na po yung aking mga magulang na may hanger at ako'y mapapalo dahil akala nila sinisira ko na po yung yero ng bubong ng bahay namin. So ganyan po ko nung bata ko. Our surroundings were pitch black. There were no buildings, no street lights, just open field. And I had never before seen the sky so encrusted with stars. So talagang na-in love ako sa night sky. I was drawn in and magic seemed to be all around me. Every time natitingala ako sa taas, one shooting star, two shooting stars, I would observe the moon and the planets even without the telescope. And magdamag po yan. And hindi ko na po namamalayan yung oras. Madaling araw na pala, and then the sun would start to rise and they would all fade away. You know what? Stargazing is beautiful. It creates another world around you. Have you ever seen any constellations while stargazing? Or have you tried to stargaze at all? So before we move on, I would like to share a couple of videos made by my students, and they had expressed their love for stargazing. So everybody, let's watch this.
Araw-araw, gabi-gabi, sinusubukan kong tumingin sa malawak na kalawakan. Naghahanap, may isang tanong sa aking isipan. Kailan ko ba mahahanap ang aking bituin?
Bakit ba ako nabubuhay? Tanong na palaging bumabagabag sa aking isipan. Kaya't araw-araw, gabi-gabi, ako'y nagninilay-nilay sa ilalim ng malawak na kalawakan.
Mada kono sekai wa boku o kai narashite tai mitai da nozomi dori daro utsukushi mo gaku yo tagai no suna doke nagame nagara kisu o shiyou yo sayonara kara ichiban toi basho de machi awase yo.
Iba't ibang ekspedisyon ang sumubok na maglakbay sa kalawakang puno ng misteryo.
Sinusubukang tuklasin lahat ng mga sikretong bumabalot sa pag-ikot ng mga planeta.
Sinusubukang maghanap ng mga kasagutan sa mga tanong na kay tagal nang bumabagabag sa sangkatauhan.
はじめましてなんてさ遥か彼方へと言い合って千年周期を一日で生きしよう
Kaya ako na humaling sa Stargazing. Ang malayo't hindi maabot ng aking mga kamay ay aking nasisilayan. Ang mga bituing kumikislap milyong taon na ang nakaraan sa akin ay kumakausap. Sinasabing ang buhay ko ay mayroon pang saysay. Gaya nila, hindi ko man ito makita sa kasalukuyan. Makikita ko ito kinabukasan.
Ang mga planeta, bituin at nebula ay aking nasisilayan. Sila may dalang sagot sa mga katanungang kay tagal lang bumabagabag sa sangkatauhan. Ipinaliliwanag ang pag-ikot ng mundo. Ipinaliliwanag kung bakit ang araw ang sentro.
愛し方さえも君の匂いがした歩き方さえもその笑い声がしたいつか消えてなくなる君のすべてをこの目に焼き付けておくことはもう権利なんかじゃない
Kaya ako na humaling sa Stargazing. Ang mga puso namin magkaiba ang hinahanap.
Sinong mag-aakala na dahil sa mga bituin,
Kami magtatagpo na may dalang kasagutan sa kanya-kanyang katanungan.
siya ang aking bituin.
Siya ang dahilan kung bakit ako nabubuhay.
運命だとか未来とかって言葉がどれだけ手を伸ばそうと届かない場所で僕ら恋をする時計の針も二人を横目に見ながら進むそんな世界を二人で一生いや何生でも生き抜いてゆこう
So I hope you enjoyed those two videos made by my students expressing their fascination and love for stargazing. And you know what? Stargazing now becomes relevant at the middle of this pandemic because people are now stuck at their homes due to the pandemic. Then there is now ample time and energy for other hobbies, especially stargazing. Stargazing comes into focus because people might be able to stay up later into the dark nights if they don't have to get up for work so early in the morning. And with stress associated with the pandemic potentially on the rise, While some people's lives have become quieter during lockdown and others have become busier and out of balance, but either ends of the busyness spectrum, there's a great deal of stress and fear. So if you find yourself lying awake at night, the familiar constellations, the moon, and the slow wheeling of the heavens can be a reassuring source of comfort. So, stargazing can give you that feeling of relaxation. Stargazing releases you from stress sa kabila po ng pandemya at mga problema na kinakaharap po natin ngayon. Stargazing can be a form of relaxation and a form of stress reliever. So, stargazing becomes relevant. And you can stargaze. Everybody can stargaze even without the telescope. Just look up at the night sky and appreciate the beauty of the heavens. But if you want to study the heavens in greater detail, then you need an extension of the human eye. You need a telescope. So at this point, I'll be giving you a guided tour of the telescope. So come with me as we study this basic tool of stargazing, which is the telescope.
Okay, the telescope is a device like this one that allows us to observe distant objects. So we can say that the telescope is an extension of the human eye. Okay, the human eye is very limited. The human eye cannot perceive very far objects or distant objects. Now, the telescope allows us to observe distant objects. So, pretty much like an extension of the human eye. Okay, the first telescope was made by Hans Lippershey, not Galileo. It was Hans Lippershey that came up with the first telescope. Okay, then Galileo got heard of this new device, so he made one for himself, and it was Galileo that pointed the telescope towards the sky. And because of his observations using the telescope, Galileo was the first to observe the moons of Jupiter, the 4 moons of Jupiter. Galileo also was the first to observe the craters of the moon, the phases of Venus. And because of that, his observations of Venus, that gave him the evidence to support the Copernican model of the solar system. Okay, a telescope works by collecting light from the distant object. Now, in this telescope, there is a mirror at the end of the telescope tube. This is a primary mirror. Now, that primary mirror collects the light from the distant object and brings it into a focal point somewhere here. Then there is a flat mirror here that reflects the light onto this eyepiece. So the eyepiece further magnifies the initial image, producing the final magnified image. Okay. In the case of the telescope made by Galileo, you have lenses. Okay, the telescope made by Lippershey and Galileo, we call it the refracting telescope that uses lenses. This telescope is called the reflecting telescope. The design was made by Isaac Newton. Okay. Okay, let me give you now a guided tour of the basic parts of this telescope. So this is the telescope tube. Right, this telescope is a reflecting telescope. Reflecting because this telescope uses mirrors to produce a magnified image. So inside the telescope tube is the primary mirror. You can see the primary mirror below the telescope tube. The primary mirror is a concave or spherical mirror. See that? And near the top of the telescope tube is a secondary flat mirror. There. So the primary mirror collects the light from the distant object and it brings it into a focal point. Then the flat mirror reflects the initial image onto this eyepiece. Okay, that's your eyepiece. This design was made by Isaac Newton. So this is what we call a Newtonian reflecting telescope. Alright, so we have here the focusing knob and we have here the finder scope. The finder scope allows you to locate your target object. Okay, then below here we have two knobs. This is the declination knob and this knob right here is the right ascension knob. Then we have here the counterweights, so it allows you to balance your telescope. And we have here the mount and tripod. The mount is called an equatorial mount. Anyway, we will explain later how the equatorial mount works. Okay, so those are the basic parts of this telescope, reflecting telescope. Okay, so this type of telescope is a refracting telescope. So a refracting telescope uses lenses to produce a magnified image of the distant object. So there are two major lenses here. We have here the objective lens. Okay, the objective lens collects the light from the distant object, and at the opposite end of the telescope tube is the eyepiece lens. Okay, so this telescope is similar to the one made by Hans Lippershey, by Galileo, and by Johannes Kepler. So, and this telescope is mounted on an altazimuth mount or altazimuthal mount. So in this type of mount, there are two movements. So we have the left and right movement, like so, and the up and down movement. So this type of mount is called an altazimuth or altazimuthal mount. Okay, so advantages of this telescope. Yeah, this telescope is rigid, sturdy. You don't need to align the lenses, and it's quite good. The only disadvantage of this type of telescope is that this telescope produces color fringes, or the refracting telescope suffers from what we call chromatic aberration. But again, modern refracting telescopes now have correcting lenses that eliminates chromatic aberration or minimizes chromatic aberration. Alright, so again we have here the finder scope. So this finder scope allows you to locate your target. Okay, so this is a refracting telescope. So this is what we call a reflecting telescope. Okay, by the name itself, reflecting, this telescope uses mirrors to capture the light of a distant object. This telescope was designed by no other than Sir Isaac Newton himself. Okay, so inside the telescope tube is a concave mirror. So as you can see here, alright, so inside there is a concave mirror that collects the light, let's say, of a distant object, say the moon or a star or a planet. Then the collected light is bounced off a secondary mirror. There's a secondary mirror near the top of the telescope tube, and it is reflected onto this eyepiece. So if you look at the eyepiece, the image is magnified. Okay, what we have here also is a finder scope that allows you to locate your target. The telescope is mounted in an equatorial mount. So the equatorial mount is polar aligned, meaning that it is pointing at the North Star. But anyway, I will explain further the use of the equatorial mount. Advantages of this reflecting telescope, well, it eliminates color fringes or chromatic aberration, and it is cheaper than the refracting telescope, which I will explain later. Okay. This type of telescope is what we call a Cata dioptric telescope. Okay, Cata dioptric, that means that it is a combination of both refractive and reflective elements. Now, in front of the telescope is a correcting lens. This correcting lens minimizes or corrects any color fringes or chromatic aberration. Then at the back of the telescope is the primary mirror. Then there's a secondary flat mirror. So it's similar to the Newtonian telescope. But the only difference is that in front of this telescope is a correcting lens. So it is a combination of both refractive and reflective elements. So we call this a catadioptric telescope.
So mga ka-spacers, ladies and gentlemen, isn't that fascinating about the telescope? The telescope really is an extension of our vision so that we could really study the heavens in more detail. Now again, let me emphasize that you don't need a telescope to stargaze. All you need to do is to look up at the night sky and appreciate the beauty of the heavens. Now, if you want to take stargazing at the next level, then you can purchase a pair of binoculars, or if you can afford, then you can buy a telescope like the one that I have presented a while ago. Alright, now since we cannot do any stargazing activity because of the threat of the Delta variant of COVID-19, the best thing that we can do is to simulate a stargazing activity using a computer program called Stellarium. So come with me and let us go stargazing using this computer program called Stellarium, and let us go where no man has gone before. Greetings at magandang araw sa inyong lahat. This is Sir Jun Cajigal, and we will try to simulate a stargazing activity using this computer program called Stellarium. Now, this is the best that we can do at the moment kasi hindi pa tayo talaga pwedeng lumabas in an open field like this with a lot of participants doing a stargazing event, again because of the threat of the COVID-19. So we will be using this computer simulation para ma-feel nyo naman kung paano mag-stargaze in an open area like this one. So according to our computer simulation, today is October 13, 2021 at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So let's imagine that we are in this open field and we are setting up our telescope, getting ready for this magnificent stargazing activity. And as we observe the sun as it sets in the western sky, let's listen to this cosmic music. Okay, so 2 hours have passed. Time check, it's 6:01 in the evening, 6:01 p.m. And we observed the sun as it sets in the western sky. So are you not fascinated by that, ladies and gentlemen? And at this moment, we can observe a bright star-like object in the night sky. So this is Venus. So if you will face at the southwest part of the sky, you will see a bright object, and that's the planet Venus. Okay, so we can set up our telescopes now, and let's zoom in on the planet Venus. So are you ready, ladies and gentlemen? So let's set up our telescopes. Let's point our telescope towards Venus, and let's zoom in, and let's observe more details of this magnificent planet. Alright, so here we go. Whoa. Whoa. Alright. So this is the planet Venus. Alright, fascinating indeed. So if we will be using your telescope, you will be observing Venus like this. So para na siyang quarter Venus, no? But as you could see, the terminal line is slightly curved. So parang gibbous face Venus na to. Alright, and this was observed by Galileo. When Galileo pointed his telescope towards Venus, Galileo observed that Venus changes shape, much like that of our moon. So Galileo observed crescent Venus. Galileo observed the first quarter and last quarter Venus and the full Venus, much like that of our moon. And because of this observation of Venus by Galileo, Galileo realized that Venus actually revolves around the sun. So this was the evidence that Galileo was looking for in support of the Copernican model of the solar system. And I'm sure you know in history what happened to Galileo when he broke the news about this observation of Venus. Okay, so if you will notice, Venus is covered with thick layers of clouds. And did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that these clouds are made of sulfuric acid? Alright? And the Venusian atmosphere is made up mostly of carbon dioxide. And the Venusian atmosphere is 90 times thicker than that of the Earth. And because of these conditions, Venus exhibits what we call a runaway greenhouse effect. So the heat from the sun penetrates the Venusian atmosphere, but the heat doesn't escape, much like that of a pressure cooker. And because of this, Venus is considered as the hottest planet in the solar system. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, fascinating indeed. Alright, so that's Venus, though the name Venus really connotes beauty and love, but in reality, Venus is one hell of a planet, again because of its hellish conditions, very high temperatures, extreme atmospheric pressures. So Venus is not really conducive for life to exist. But nonetheless, we cannot erase the possibility that probably high above the Venusian clouds, there might be some microscopic life. So we still need to explore through robotic space probes Venus. Alright, so that's Venus, the hottest planet in our solar system. Alright, so that's how we observe Venus in the western part of the night sky. Fascinating indeed. Okay, so let's move now our telescope. So by this time, October 13, we could see the other celestial objects in our October sky. So we can see the moon, then we have Saturn and Jupiter. Alright, so let us now point our telescope towards the moon. Alright, so here we go. Let's magnify the image of the moon through our telescope. Whoa. Alright, so you will notice that the phase of the moon is now in its first quarter. Okay, very similar to Venus, right? Okay, and you could see here the terminal line. So the terminal line is that imaginary line that separates the lighted part of the moon from the unlighted part of the moon. So straight na straight siya. So the moon is in its first quarter phase. And as you will observe through the telescope, there are dark patches in the lunar surface. Those dark patches are actually lunar plains, mga patag yan ng buwan. And these bright areas of the moon, just follow my cursor. Those bright areas are lunar highlands and impact craters. Fascinating, don't you think, ladies and gentlemen? Alright, so let's magnify further the image of the moon so that we could see more details of its surface. Alright, so here we go. Whoa. Whoa. Alright, so you could see those craters. So most of the craters seen on the moon are actually formed through impact events of asteroids, comet. Alright, so those white spots again are craters. And those dark patches are lunar plains. And the early sailors thought that those dark patches are actually areas of liquid water. That's why they named it Marias or seas. So akala nila mga bodies of water yan, yung mga dark patches na yan. They thought that those dark patches contained water. So they gave the name Maria or seas, but actually those are lunar plains. Kaya yun yung mga pangalan. And the most famous dark patch of them all was the Sea of Tranquility, wherein the Apollo 11 spacecraft landed. Okay, so fascinating indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Alright. And ito, nahihiwagaan ako dito, these three craters na ito na magkakatabi. I always observe that through my telescope. And hindi ako talaga nagsasawa. Okay, so that's the lunar landscape. Fascinating, really. Alright, and here, if you will follow my cursor, ito, kita na rin yung Montes Apenninus. So this is a very long mountain range. Okay, Montes Apenninus was named after that mountain range in Italy, the Apennine Mountains. Alright, so that's the moon. So that's first quarter on this time, October 13, 2021. Okay, so let's return the moon to its normal size. Ayan. Okay, so are you not fascinated, ladies and gentlemen? Alright, so that's the moon. Fascinating indeed. Okay, and we could also see the two planets, Saturn and Jupiter. Yan, magkakatabi sila. No? Moon, actually yung apat na yan. So you have Venus, then the moon, then Saturn. Okay, so you have here Venus. Yan, we observe Venus through our telescope kanina. Then we have here the moon, and we have here the two gas giant, Saturn and Jupiter. By this time, at about 6 o'clock, you can, these two gas giants are already visible in the southeastern part of the night sky. Okay, so let's now go back to our telescope and let's first observe the magnificent ringed planet Saturn. Alright, so here we go. Let's magnify the image of Saturn. And as we magnify, we could see more stars. Our telescope is collecting more light and we see more stars. Okay, so we further magnify the image of Saturn. And as you could see here, you have Saturn. We can see the outline of the rings. And we could see also Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. And we could see the other moons orbiting Saturn like Enceladus, Tethys, Dione, Rhea. But later we will take a look at Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. Okay, so let's magnify the image of the magnificent ringed planet Saturn. Fantastic, don't you think? Okay, so those rings was actually first observed by Galileo. Galileo thought of them as rabbit's ears. But other astronomers with their more powerful telescopes, they were able to determine that those are actually rings surrounding the planet. And you could see here a dark area, much like a gap. And this was observed by the astronomer Giovanni Cassini. That's why this gap is known as the Cassini Division. Alright? And based from the observations and data collected by the Voyager space probes, the rings of Saturn, they're made up of particles of ice. Alright. And the atmosphere of Saturn is made up mostly of hydrogen and helium. And the atmosphere also has a banded appearance similar to Jupiter. Alright, so that's how we observe the magnificent ringed planet Saturn through our telescope. Fantastic, isn't it? Okay. So at this point, let's point our telescope towards this very interesting moon of Saturn called Titan. So Titan is actually the largest moon of Saturn. Okay, so this is the highest magnification that we can get from our telescope as we observe Titan. And Titan is the only moon in the solar system that has an atmosphere. And did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that the atmosphere of Titan is made up mostly of nitrogen, very similar to Earth. And the Titan was already visited by the Huygens space probe. The Huygens space probe, discovered liquid on the surface of Titan. Not liquid water, but liquid methane. So again, there's a possibility that methane-tolerant microorganisms might thrive in those methane lakes. So we need to study Titan more by sending robotic rovers on the surface of Titan. Okay, fascinating indeed. Titan is a pretty good candidate for the existence of life outside the Earth, again because of its methane lake. Alright, so that's Titan as seen through our telescope. And that's the magnificent ringed planet Saturn. Okay, fantastic. Okay, let us now point our telescope to Jupiter. Alright, so as you can see here, you have the Moon, then Saturn and Jupiter. So ganyan yung arrangement niya on this date, October 13, 2021. Okay, so let us now zoom in on the planet Jupiter. So let's point now our telescope towards the mighty Jupiter. Okay, so here we go. Whoa. Whoa. Fantastic. Alright. Okay, so at this magnification, we can observe the 4 Galilean moons. And Galilean because this was first observed by Galileo himself. So these 4 largest moons of Jupiter. But again, Jupiter is orbited by around 64 plus moons. But through our telescope, we can only observe the 4 largest moons of Jupiter. So we have Ganymede, then Jupiter, then we have Europa, Io, and Callisto. Okay, so let us now zoom in first on the planet Jupiter itself. Let's increase the magnification of our telescope. Oh boy. Wow. Fantastic. So we could see here the 2 equatorial bands of Jupiter. Very distinct through our telescope. And if we increase the magnification even further, we could see here the Great Red Spot. And did you know that the Great Red Spot is 3 times bigger than our planet? And based from the data gathered by the Voyager space probes, this Great Red Spot is actually a cyclonic storm. Alright, so fascinating. So the atmosphere of Jupiter is also made up of hydrogen and helium similar to Saturn. And the atmosphere of Jupiter also has a banded appearance. But again, if you will notice, the bands, the atmospheric bands of Jupiter are more distinct than that of Saturn. And did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that Jupiter is also surrounded by rings, as discovered by Voyager? But the rings of Jupiter are made up of rocky material and it is not that reflective. Okay, in contrast to Saturn's rings, which is made up of particles of ice, which is highly reflective. Alright, so let us now zoom in on the 4 Galilean moons, starting with Europa. Okay, so let's zoom in on this very interesting moon called Europa. Alright, so based from the images taken by the Voyager space probe, Europa is covered with ice. It has an icy surface and it is believed by many astronomers that ice is water ice. And if that's water ice, that means that beneath the icy sheet of Europa is liquid water, much like here on Earth. So here on Earth, ice forms in solid form near the surface, but beneath that is liquid water. And if there is liquid water, it means only one thing: it may support life. That's why Europa is a pretty good candidate for the existence of life outside planet Earth. And NASA is planning a mission to Europa, I think 5 years from now. So they will be sending a robotic space probe that will land on Europa. And that space probe will drill a hole penetrating the icy sheet. And once the space probe had penetrated the icy sheet of Europa, it will deploy a robotic autonomous submarine so that it can scan the liquid part of Europa to search for life. So isn't that fascinating? Okay, so that's Europa. Okay, very interesting moon of Jupiter. Okay, so let us now zoom in. Let's point now our telescope towards Io, another interesting moon of Jupiter. So you will notice that Io is yellowish in color. Again, that's because of sulfur. And why is that? Because Io has 400 more active volcanoes as discovered by the Voyager space probes. I mean active, meaning pumuputok talaga, nag-e-erupt yung mga volcanoes na yan, about 400 active volcanoes on Io. So Io is considered the most geologically active moon in our solar system with more than 400 active volcanoes that spews out sulfur and sulfur dioxide as observed by the Voyager space probe. So fascinating indeed, no? Alright, so that's Io, a geologically active moon in our solar system. Okay, next, let's point our telescope towards Callisto. And as you can see here in our telescope image of Callisto, Callisto is a heavily cratered moon. Again, because probably asteroids had bombarded Callisto. Remember, Jupiter is near the asteroid belt. So there's a high chance that Callisto may have been bombarded with those asteroid bodies near that area called the asteroid belt. Alright, so that's Callisto, and we must not forget the moon Ganymede. So nandito siya. This is Ganymede. So let's zoom in on Ganymede. There. And if you will notice, Ganymede also is a heavily cratered moon, just like Callisto. And did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system, even larger than Mercury. Fascinating indeed about Ganymede. Alright, so those are the Galilean moons. Again, as discovered by Galileo Galilei when he pointed his crude telescope towards Jupiter. Alright, so are you not fascinated by that? By just looking up at the night sky, talagang may inspire kayo. The beauty and the splendor of the heavens. Okay, and at this time, it's still 6 o'clock. Pinos ko lang yung stellarium. We could see already 3 planets. Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter, plus the first quarter moon. Okay? So just look up at the night sky in the southwestern part of the night sky on October 13, and you will be observing Venus, our first quarter moon, Saturn, and Jupiter. Okay, so let's speed up our time, and mamayang madaling araw you will also observe the constellation Orion. Yan, lilitaw yan at about past midnight. Okay, so let's speed up our time now. So it's 6 o'clock. Bibilisin natin yung oras. Okay, so here we go. While we listen to this cosmic music. Okay, so time check, it's 12:26 a.m. of October 14. And if you will face the eastern part of the sky, you should be able to see the constellation Orion. Okay, so let's magnify. Let's use our telescope. Let's magnify the constellation Orion. And you could see here the Orion's belt with those 3 stars. Alnitak, Alnira, and Mintaka. Alright? So Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. So those are the 3 stars that makes up the belt of Orion. And we could also see Betelgeuse right here. Just follow my cursor. This orange colored star. Pero ito ay red giant. Actually, Betelgeuse is a red giant star. Yan, malaking star to. This is much bigger than our own sun. So fascinating. Huh? And you could also see the other stars that makes up the Orion constellation. So we have here Bellatrix, Rigel, and this star Type. Alright. Fascinating indeed. So that's the constellation Orion at about past 12 in the morning of October 14. Okay, so ganda talaga mag-stargaze, no? Pag ganito. On a cloudless night like this, nakaka-relax. Okay, so let's continue to speed up the time. So we are trying to spot. We could see Uranus. Kaya lang we cannot observe Uranus through our telescope. We need a more powerful telescope to observe Uranus and Neptune. Okay, so we have now, it's 3 o'clock a.m. Alright, so we can see here lots of stars. Okay. We could see here the constellation Gemini with the 2 distinct stars, Pollux and Castor. And we have the brightest star in the night sky, that's Sirius, at about 3:47 a.m. Okay, so fascinating indeed. Alright, so it's 5:23 a.m. and we could see now the sun rising in the eastern horizon. So let's observe as the sun rises as we listen to this cosmic music. Okay, so it's already 6:30 in the morning and we could see now the sun above the eastern horizon. Okay, so that's it for our simulated stargazing activity. So I hope you were inspired by this. And probably as you look up at the night sky, try to observe those planets and including the moon. Okay, so this is Sir Jun Cajigal saying live long and prosper and always stay safe and always keep looking up at the night sky. Remember, if you're down, just look up. Thank you and good day. Well, I guess that's about it for this talk on the beauty of stargazing. Stargazing is beautiful, and at the middle of this pandemic, stargazing can be beneficial. It can be a stress reliever, and it can be a reassuring source of comfort. So thank you for your time. Maraming salamat po for listening. And again, I would like to thank the guidance for inviting me to share my passion for astronomy and stargazing. So this is your Caspacer and Space Commander Sir Jun Cajigal saying, live long and prosper. So always stay safe, always wear your face mask and face shield. Maraming salamat po.
That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives.
It is a wonderful and astonishing thing to me that we are, you and I, are somehow at least one of the ways that the universe knows itself.
Those worlds in space are as countless as all the grains of sand and all the beaches of the earth. Each of those worlds is as real as ours. In every one of them, there's a succession of incidents, events, occurrences, which influence its future.
We are special because we're the same. We are one, not only with each other, but with the universe itself.
And what he might say with irony, I say with conviction. What a piece of work is man! How noble it is, how infinite in faculty, in form, in moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god.
It is the struggle itself that is most important. must strive to be more than we are, Law. It does not matter that we will never reach our ultimate goal. The effort yields its own rewards.
Ten, 9, 8.
Let's
7,
rock and roll!
6,